It's well past midnight in a quiet Cambridgeshire neighborhood. One of those places where people leave doors unlocked, and trust is something you can feel in the hush of the streets. Tonight, that trust has been shattered. Inside that home, the silence is suffocating. Someone's final moments have played out here in a desperate, hidden drama. Whispers of fear and betrayal hang in the air, leaving us to wonder who wanted this life snuffed out and at what unimaginable cost. As we step closer, a chilling question emerges. How far will a person go when they see someone else's existence not as a bond of love, but as a financial escape route? Tonight, the unthinkable has happened, and the truth is ready to be exposed. Welcome to CrimeByte, where we don't just tell stories, we uncover the raw, disturbing truths lurking behind everyday facades. With over a decade of peeling back the layers of human deceit, we bring you closer to the crimes that make us reassess what it means to be human. If you're new to our channel, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Trust us, you won't want to miss what comes next. The neighborhood was ordinary, the kind of place where life unfolded predictably. Cambridgeshire, a tranquil corner of England, was far removed from the chaos of the city, offering its residents a peaceful, almost idyllic existence. The houses were lined in neat rows, each one similar but distinct in its own way. Tidy gardens with trimmed hedges, pastel-colored doors, and lace curtains framing the windows. On any given evening, the sound of children laughing and dogs barking echoed faintly through the streets as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was the kind of place where people felt safe, where neighbors waved and exchanged pleasantries over garden fences. But on the night of November 13th, the peace of this seemingly idyllic neighborhood was shattered. Inside one of these homes, an unspeakable crime had taken place. Sian Hammond, a beloved member of the community and a woman known for her kindness and warmth, had been found dead. The call came in at 10:47 p.m. Robert Hammond, her husband, had phoned emergency services, his voice panicked and trembling. "There's been a break-in," he gasped. "My wife, she's been shot." The urgency in his tone was unmistakable. But there was something else, something that would later strike investigators as rehearsed. When the police arrived, the scene was chaotic but strange. At first glance, it appeared to be a burglary gone wrong. Furniture was overturned, a picture frame lay shattered on the floor, and papers were strewn across the living room. But to the trained eyes of the detectives, something didn't add up. Sian's body lay in the hallway, her lifeless form surrounded by a pool of blood. She had been shot once, a single, fatal wound that left no room for survival. It was a precise shot, almost clinical in its execution. This wasn't the chaotic act of a panicked burglar. It was something far more deliberate. From the moment we stepped into that house, we knew something was off, she recalls, her tone measured but firm. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle that matched the scene. It felt staged. The neighbors were stunned. This was not the kind of place where violent crime happened. For years, it had been a haven for families, retirees, and young couples starting their lives together. Sian and Robert had seemed like the perfect addition to this close-knit community. She was warm and outgoing, the type to lend a hand to neighbors or organize community events. Robert, on the other hand, was more reserved but polite. A man who kept to himself but never failed to offer a friendly nod. They were just so normal, Marion says, shaking her head. Sian was always smiling, always helping out. And Robert, well, he wasn't as outgoing, but he seemed nice enough. I never imagined something like this could happen. Not here. As word of Sian's death spread, so did the questions. Who could have done this? Why? And how had it happened in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone? The idea of an intruder seemed plausible at first. After all, burglaries weren't unheard of, even in a place like Cambridgeshire. But as investigators began to piece together the events of that night, they uncovered a story far more chilling. The first crack in Robert's story appeared almost immediately. He claimed he had been in the kitchen when he heard the gunshot, but when officers asked why he didn't hear any sounds of a struggle or forced entry, his answers became vague. He suggested the intruder must have been exceptionally quiet, slipping in and out without making a sound. Yet there were no signs of forced entry, and the disarray in the living room felt too deliberate, as though someone had tried too hard to make it look like a burglary. Then there was the gun. It wasn't a weapon commonly used in home invasions. In fact, it was the kind of gun that required familiarity to handle, something a burglar would be unlikely to carry. Ballistic tests would later reveal that the gun had been fired at close range, a detail that raised even more questions about Robert's version of events. This wasn't a random act, the expert explains. The precision of the shot, the choice of weapon, it all pointed to someone who knew exactly what they were doing. As investigators continued their work, they turned their attention to Robert himself. His behavior, which initially seemed like shock and grief, began to raise eyebrows. He was cooperative, even eager to assist, but there was a detachment in his demeanor that didn't sit right. He wasn't acting like a man who had just lost his wife, Detective Carter recalls. There was no raw emotion, no outbursts of grief. Instead, he seemed controlled, almost rehearsed. In the days that followed, forensic teams combed through the Hammond residence, piece by piece. They examined every speck of dust, every fingerprint, every item that seemed out of place. What they found would not only challenge Robert's story, but completely dismantle it. This was just the beginning. In the quiet streets of Cambridgeshire, the story was unfolding. A story of trust betrayed, love turned to greed, and a crime so calculated that it would leave the entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their neighbors. Robert and Sian Hammond seemed like the quintessential suburban couple. On the surface, they embodied stability, a modest home in Cambridgeshire, steady careers, and a shared life that appeared unmarred by drama or scandal. But beneath the carefully maintained facade lay a marriage quietly strained by invisible cracks. Cracks that would only become visible when it was too late. Sian was the heart of the relationship. A project manager by profession, she was known for her organizational skills, calm demeanor, and innate kindness. Friends described her as a fixer, someone who went out of her way to ensure everything ran smoothly, both at work and at home. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, baked cakes for neighbors, and volunteered at local charities. Robert, on the other hand, was more reserved. A mortgage broker by trade, he had started his career on a high note, riding the wave of a booming housing market. But over time, the industry shifted. Stricter regulations, fluctuating markets, and increasing competition made it harder for him to maintain the income he once enjoyed. As the financial strain mounted, so did Robert's anxiety. Friends later noted that he seemed distracted in social settings, often brushing off questions about work. Robert was always polite, but there was something off about him. He didn't open up much, and when he did, it was usually about surface-level things. Sian, on the other hand, was an open book. She made you feel at ease. Despite the growing tension, Sian seemed unaware of the full extent of Robert's struggles. She continued to trust him implicitly, confident in his ability to provide and protect. But while she focused on maintaining the warmth of their home, Robert was quietly sinking deeper into financial trouble. Then came the life insurance policy. It wasn't unusual for couples to have life insurance. After all, it provided financial security in the event of a tragedy. But investigators would later discover that Robert had recently increased the coverage on Sian's policy to £450,000, a significant sum that raised immediate suspicions. When we found out about the life insurance policy, it was like a spotlight shining on the entire case, she explains. It provided a clear motive, a way for Robert to escape his mounting debts. But it also raised a chilling question. Had he planned this all along? Sian, by all accounts, was completely unaware of the increase. She trusted Robert to handle their finances, believing he had her best interests at heart. For Robert, however, the policy wasn't just a safety net, it was a lifeline. His debts had reached a critical point, and he saw the payout as the only way to regain control of his crumbling life. As the financial pressure mounted, so did the emotional distance between Robert and Sian. While she continued to maintain her optimistic outlook, Robert grew increasingly withdrawn. Small disagreements turned into arguments, and moments of silence stretched longer than usual. But Sian, ever the peacemaker, chalked it up to stress. She believed that with time and patience, they could overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. What she didn't know was that Robert had already made a decision, one that would shatter the life they had built together. The cracks in their marriage were subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders. To the neighbors, they still seemed like a happy couple. They attended community events, hosted the occasional dinner party, and smiled for photos like any other pair. But inside the walls of their home, Robert was carefully constructing a plan that would forever redefine the meaning of betrayal. It's often said that financial stress is one of the leading causes of marital breakdowns, but for Robert, the solution wasn't divorce or even an honest conversation. It was far darker. Investigators would later describe his actions as methodical, almost clinical. Each decision he made, whether it was increasing the insurance coverage or rehearsing his alibi, was a step toward a chilling endgame. Sian, meanwhile, carried on with her life, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Friends recalled how excited she had been about an upcoming holiday they were planning, a chance for her and Robert to reconnect and leave their worries behind. But that holiday would never come. Instead, what awaited her was a betrayal so profound that it would shock not only her family and friends, but an entire community. As we move forward, the question looms large. How does a man go from being a husband to a killer? What compels someone to value money over life, greed over love? These questions would haunt everyone who knew Sian and Robert Hammond, as the story of their marriage unraveled in the harsh light of truth. The night of November 13th, 2023 began like any other for the Hammonds. The air was crisp, the streets were quiet, and inside the Hammond home, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Earlier that evening, Sian had prepared dinner, a simple, comforting meal of roasted chicken and vegetables. She set the table meticulously, as she always did, folding the napkins into neat triangles. Robert sat at the dining table, scrolling absent-mindedly on his phone while she moved about the kitchen. According to Robert's later testimony, the evening was uneventful. After dinner, the couple retired to the living room to watch television, a routine they had followed countless times before. Sian curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, while Robert flipped through channels, barely paying attention. But what Sian didn't know was that Robert had spent the better part of the day rehearsing what he would later describe as the hardest decision of his life. In truth, it was coldly premeditated. Investigators would later uncover his meticulous planning, an unsettling level of control for someone about to commit such a horrific act. At approximately 9:45 p.m., Robert suggested that he check the locks on the doors, a habit Sian thought nothing of. She stayed on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her attention completely absorbed in a recipe video. Then the silence was broken by the sound of a gunshot. When emergency services received Robert's frantic call at 10:47 p.m., his voice was panicked, but investigators would later note that his words felt oddly rehearsed. "There's been a break-in," he told the operator. My wife has been shot." When officers arrived, the scene that awaited them was chaotic but puzzling. Sian's body lay in the hallway, just a few steps from the living room. She had been shot once in the chest, a clean, precise shot that left no room for survival. At first glance, the scene appeared to be the aftermath of a burglary gone wrong. Drawers had been pulled open, their contents strewn across the floor, and a window in the kitchen was partially ajar. But to the trained eyes of the investigators, the details didn't add up. There was something staged about it, recalls Detective Inspector Louise Carter. The disarray felt too deliberate, almost theatrical. And then there was the matter of the gun. Burglars don't typically carry weapons like that. The gun, later identified as a small caliber pistol, had been fired at close range, a detail that contradicted Robert's claim that he had been in another room when the shooting occurred. As officers questioned him that night, Robert's behavior raised subtle but significant red flags. He appeared shaken, pacing nervously and holding his head in his hands. But there was a detachment in his demeanor, a lack of the raw, unfiltered emotion that often accompanies sudden loss. He wasn't crying, one officer noted. He wasn't angry or distraught. It was like he was playing the part of a grieving husband, but the performance wasn't quite convincing. As the night wore on, forensic teams began their work, meticulously documenting every inch of the scene. What they uncovered would challenge Robert's story at every turn. The blood spatter analysis revealed that the gunshot had been fired at a downward angle, suggesting that the shooter was standing directly over Sian at the time. This contradicted Robert's claim that she had been shot from a distance during a struggle with an intruder. Additionally, there were no signs of forced entry. The kitchen window, which Robert claimed the burglar had used to escape, showed no evidence of being tampered with. In fact, the dust on the windowsill remained undisturbed, suggesting it had been opened from the inside. The placement of the scattered objects also raised suspicions. Drawers had been pulled open, but the items inside were untouched, and the broken picture frames seemed to have been deliberately placed on the floor rather than knocked over in a struggle. It felt choreographed, Carter explains, like someone had gone through the motions of creating chaos without understanding what real chaos looks like. The turning point came when forensic technicians discovered a set of fingerprints on the gun, Robert's fingerprints. While it wasn't unusual for his prints to be on household items, the fact that they were on the murder weapon and no one else's was damning. As dawn broke over Cambridgeshire, the neighborhood was still reeling from the events of the night before. Residents gathered in small groups, exchanging hushed whispers and speculative glances toward the Hammond home. For the investigators, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. But proving that Robert had murdered his wife would require more than circumstantial evidence. They needed to uncover the motive, the why behind the crime, and that meant digging deeper into Robert's life. As investigators turned their attention to Robert Hammond's life, they quickly uncovered a web of financial troubles that painted a starkly different picture of the man many thought they knew. To the outside world, Robert was a successful mortgage broker with a stable income and a comfortable lifestyle. But behind closed doors, he was a man on the brink of financial ruin. Robert's career had begun with promise. In his early years, he had been a rising star in the mortgage industry, navigating the complexities of the housing market with ease. He was charismatic, persuasive, and skilled at closing deals. But as the years passed and the economic landscape shifted, Robert found himself struggling to adapt. The financial pressure was relentless. Robert had taken out loans to cover mounting expenses, including a mortgage on the house he shared with Sian. Each new loan only deepened his debt, and as the payments piled up, he began to spiral. His earnings could no longer keep pace with his lifestyle or his obligations. Forensic accountants working with the police uncovered a grim truth. Robert was drowning in debt. He owed tens of thousands of pounds to multiple creditors, and his credit cards were maxed out. His bank statements painted a picture of desperation, frequent cash withdrawals, missed payments, and a growing reliance on short-term loans with exorbitant interest rates. The pressure at work wasn't helping. Former colleagues described Robert as increasingly erratic in the months leading up to Sian's death. He had become withdrawn, often avoiding meetings and deflecting questions about his performance. He wasn't the same guy anymore, the coworker recalls. There was this weight on him, like he was carrying the world on his shoulders. We knew he was stressed, but no one realized how bad it was. The investigators' breakthrough came when they discovered a life insurance policy on Sian. It wasn't unusual for married couples to have such policies. It was a common financial safety net. But what stood out was the timing. Just months before Sian's death, Robert had significantly increased the coverage amount on her policy to £450,000. Detectives quickly realized that the policy was not merely a precaution. It was a motive. That life insurance policy was the smoking gun, Carter explains. It provided a clear financial incentive for Robert to commit the crime. He was drowning in debt, and the payout offered him a way out, a way to erase everything and start fresh. But for Robert, the policy wasn't just a solution to his financial woes. It was a lifeline he had carefully planned to cash in. Sian, by all accounts, had no idea about the changes to her life insurance policy. She trusted Robert to handle their finances and believed that their occasional arguments about money were no more serious than those of any other couple. Friends later described how Sian had been excited about the future, particularly an upcoming holiday she and Robert were planning. She spoke of it as an opportunity to reconnect, to put their worries aside, and enjoy each other's company. But as Sian focused on the life they were building together, Robert was plotting her death. Investigators would later piece together the chilling sequence of events leading up to the crime, revealing a level of calculation that left even seasoned detectives stunned. Robert had taken every step necessary to ensure that the murder would look like a random act of violence. From staging the burglary to purchasing the handgun months in advance, he had meticulously constructed a narrative designed to deflect suspicion. But for all his planning, Robert made mistakes. He underestimated the forensic investigators who would uncover the truth hidden in the details. The financial motive provided a foundation for the case against Robert, but detectives knew they needed more. They needed to prove not just why he had killed Sian, but how. As they continued to unravel his life, a disturbing pattern emerged. Text messages recovered from Robert's phone revealed cryptic exchanges with an unnamed contact, hinting at a plan in motion. Surveillance footage from a nearby petrol station added another layer to the puzzle. It showed Robert leaving the house at a time that contradicted his initial statement to police. For the investigators, these pieces of evidence painted a chilling picture. A man so consumed by greed and desperation that he was willing to sacrifice the person who trusted him most. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer it became that Sian's death was not a crime of passion or a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the result of months of planning, driven by a financial motive that Robert believed would solve all his problems. Forensic science has often been described as the silent witness in a courtroom, a meticulous observer that cannot lie, forget, or be intimidated. In the case of Robert Hammond, it was forensic evidence that would ultimately dismantle his carefully constructed facade. From the moment investigators stepped into the crime scene, they knew that the smallest details would hold the key to unlocking the truth. The scene at the Hammond residence told two conflicting stories. On one hand, the disarray, a toppled chair, drawers pulled open, and a broken picture frame suggested the chaos of a burglary gone wrong. On the other hand, the absence of forced entry, coupled with the neatness of the scattered items, hinted at something more sinister. The first breakthrough came from the blood spatter analysis. Sian had been shot once, a single fatal bullet to the chest. The trajectory of the bullet, however, told a different story than the one Robert had given. The blood spatter indicated that Sian was lying down or partially kneeling when she was shot, the expert explained. The shooter was standing over her, firing downward. This wasn't a struggle, it was an execution. This revelation directly contradicted Robert's claim that Sian had been shot during a scuffle with an intruder. Furthermore, the precise nature of the gunshot, a clean entry wound with no signs of hesitation, suggested that the shooter had a steady hand and a clear intention. The handgun itself became another critical piece of evidence. It was found in the house, tucked away in a storage box that Robert claimed he hadn't touched in years. But forensic technicians discovered a different story. Fingerprint analysis revealed that the gun had been recently handled, and Robert's fingerprints were found on the grip and trigger. There were no other prints on the weapon, further discrediting the idea of an unknown intruder. Ballistic tests confirmed that the bullet recovered from Sian's body matched the firearm. Investigators now had a direct link between Robert and the murder weapon, but the most damning discovery was found in Robert's own digital footprint. Forensic analysis of his phone and computer revealed an unsettling timeline of activity leading up to the crime. 2 weeks before Sian's death, Robert had searched for topics like how to stage a burglary and life insurance payout timelines after death. These searches were later deleted, but forensic experts were able to recover them from the device's cache. Equally incriminating were the text messages found on his phone. Investigators uncovered cryptic exchanges with an unnamed contact, suggesting that Robert had discussed his plan with someone else, or, at the very least, sought advice. One message read, "It's all set, just need to execute. No loose ends." Another read, "Make sure they buy the story. No mistakes." While investigators couldn't confirm who the recipient of the messages was, the tone and timing left little doubt about their connection to the crime. The forensic team also examined the kitchen window, which Robert claimed the intruder had used to escape. It was a crucial detail in his version of events, but the evidence didn't support his story. The window showed no signs of tampering, no scratches, no damaged locks, and no fingerprints other than Robert's. Even more telling was the layer of undisturbed dust on the windowsill, suggesting it hadn't opened for months. With every piece of evidence, Robert's story unraveled further. The disarray in the living room, which he had insisted was caused by the intruder, now appeared staged. Items were scattered in a way that felt almost too deliberate, as though someone had carefully orchestrated the chaos. Detective Inspector Louise Carter described it as a scene created by someone who thought they understood what a burglary looked like, but missed the details that would make it believable. The final piece of the puzzle came from Robert's smartwatch. Forensic analysis of the device revealed his movements on the night of the crime, contradicting his claim that he had been in another room when the gunshot was fired. The data showed that Robert had been standing in the hallway, the exact location where Sian was found at the time of the shooting. Furthermore, his heart rate spiked shortly afterward, consistent with the physiological response to a high-stress event. This combination of physical evidence, digital footprints, and behavioral inconsistencies painted a chilling picture. Robert had not only planned the murder, but had gone to great lengths to cover his tracks, underestimating the expertise of the forensic team that would ultimately expose his lies. For the investigators, the case was now clear. Robert Hammond had killed his wife in cold blood, driven by financial desperation and a misguided belief that he could outsmart the system. The forensic evidence left no room for doubt, and it was only a matter of time before he would be confronted with the full weight of the truth. Robert Hammond's alibi unraveled the moment investigators began piecing together the timeline of events. His calm, calculated demeanor during early interrogations, which at first suggested composure, soon began to reveal subtle cracks. Robert's version of events, that he was in the kitchen checking the back door when he heard the gunshot, relied on the notion of an unknown intruder fleeing through the kitchen window. Yet inconsistencies in his account immediately raised red flags. "When did you hear the gunshot?" the detective asked. Robert hesitated, a slight pause that stretched a little too long. "Around 10:45, I was in the kitchen. Sian thought she heard something earlier, so I was checking. Then I heard it, and I ran to the hallway." His voice quivered slightly, though his demeanor remained controlled. Investigators noted the vagueness of Robert's timeline. His account left unexplained gaps, critical minutes that seemed to vanish into thin air. Forensic evidence suggested Sian had been dead for at least 15 minutes before the emergency call was made. This discrepancy was their first clue that something wasn't right. The smartwatch on Robert's wrist, a piece of everyday technology that he likely hadn't considered, became one of the most damning pieces of evidence. The device not only tracked his location, but also recorded his heart rate, providing an almost minute-by-minute log of his movements on the night of the murder. The data placed Robert in the hallway, the exact location of the crime, at 10:30 p.m., a full 15 minutes before he claimed to have heard the gunshot. More incriminatingly, his heart rate spiked dramatically at the same time, consistent with the stress and adrenaline of a high-stakes, violent act. When detectives confronted Robert with this evidence, his response was a mixture of deflection and denial. "The data must be wrong," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. "I wasn't there. I told you I was in the kitchen." The inconsistencies didn't stop there. Robert claimed the intruder had fled through the kitchen window, but forensic analysis painted a different story. The window's lock showed no signs of tampering, and the dust on the sill was undisturbed. Investigators concluded that the window hadn't been opened in months. The apparent chaos in the living room, which Robert insisted was evidence of a burglary, also appeared staged. Drawers were pulled open, but their contents remained oddly neat. Picture frames lay shattered, yet there were no glass shards on the floor. It looked like someone tried to create the illusion of a struggle, Detective Carter later said. But real chaos isn't this calculated. It's messy, unplanned. This was a performance. As detectives presented these findings, Robert's calm exterior began to crack. His responses became defensive, his tone shifting from sorrowful to combative. At one point, he muttered, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," a statement that sent a chill through the room. It was clear that Robert's carefully constructed alibi was falling apart. But the question lingered. What drove a man to betray the trust of the person who loved him most? The arrest of Robert Hammond was as much a relief as it was a shock to the Cambridgeshire community. For weeks, the peaceful suburb had been overshadowed by whispers and speculation. When police finally arrived at the Hammond residence to take Robert into custody, it felt like a turning point. but one that left many grappling with disbelief. Robert answered the door, dressed in a sweater and jeans, his face pale but composed. He made no attempt to resist as the officers informed him of the charges and placed him in handcuffs. The arrest brought mixed emotions to those who had known Robert and Sian. For some, it was a confirmation of suspicions they hadn't dared voice. For others, it was a stunning revelation that shattered their perception of a man they thought they knew. "We waved to him every morning," she said. "He always seemed polite, quiet, but now I wonder what was really going on behind those closed doors." Inside the police station, Robert's demeanor shifted. The stoicism he displayed at his home gave way to an air of resignation. He offered no resistance as officers fingerprinted and photographed him, his expression a mix of exhaustion and defeat. For Sian's family, the arrest brought a sense of justice, but also a wave of grief. The man they had once welcomed into their lives was now accused of destroying everything they held dear. "She trusted him," Sian's sister later said in an interview, her voice breaking. "We all did, and he used that trust against her." The arrest also marked a turning point for the investigation. With Robert in custody, detectives could focus on building an airtight case. But the weight of their findings raised an unsettling question. How could someone betray the person they were meant to love and protect? The trial of Robert Hammond was a spectacle that captivated not only Cambridgeshire, but the entire nation. It wasn't just the crime itself, a husband murdering his wife for financial gain, that drew attention, but the chilling details of how he planned and executed his scheme. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out their case. Over the course of several weeks, they painted a picture of a man consumed by financial ruin, who saw his wife not as a partner, but as a solution to his problems. This was not a momentary lapse, the prosecutor declared in her opening statement. This was cold, calculated murder, a betrayal of the deepest trust. The defense, however, argued that the case against Robert was circumstantial. They claimed the evidence didn't conclusively prove his guilt, and suggested that investigators had ignored other possible suspects. But the forensic evidence told a different story. Blood spatter analysis, ballistic tests, and digital data from Robert's smartwatch all pointed to a carefully orchestrated crime. The prosecution methodically dismantled the defense's arguments, presenting a timeline that left no room for doubt. One of the most emotional moments came when Sian's family took the stand. Their testimonies painted a heartbreaking portrait of a woman who was loved deeply and betrayed in the most unimaginable way. "She was the light of our lives," she said through tears, "and he took her from us. How do you forgive that?" The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning their verdict. Guilty. As the judge delivered the sentence, life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years. Robert remained stoic, his expression as unyielding as ever. The trial left a lingering question. How does a seemingly ordinary man cross the line into darkness? The day the jury delivered their verdict was one of both relief and sorrow for those who had been following the case. The courtroom was silent, save for the shuffling of papers and the murmurs of anticipation. Robert Hammond sat at the defense table, his face expressionless, as the foreperson rose to deliver the decision. "Guilty," the foreperson said, her voice steady and clear. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sian's family clutched each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces as the weight of justice mingled with their grief. Onlookers exchanged hushed whispers, their eyes darting between Robert and the grieving family. Robert, in contrast, remained stoic. He didn't flinch or show any sign of emotion, a reaction that only deepened the public's perception of him as cold and unfeeling. The judge's sentencing was swift and severe. Robert Hammond was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 25 years before he would be eligible for parole. The judge's words were sharp, condemning Robert's calculated betrayal of trust. "This was a crime of pure greed," the judge declared. "You saw your wife not as a partner to cherish, but as a means to escape your financial troubles. Your actions were callous, premeditated, and unforgivable." Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, many holding signs that read, "Justice for Sian." Sian's sister addressed the media, her voice breaking as she spoke. "We can't bring her back," she said, clutching a framed photograph of Sian. "But we can make sure her story is told, and that no one ever forgets the beautiful, kind-hearted person she was. She trusted him, and he betrayed her in the worst way possible. The verdict and sentencing brought a sense of closure to some, but for Sian's family, the wounds remained raw. "How do you move on from this?" her mother asked in a later interview. "We have justice, but we don't have Sian, and we never will." For the community of Cambridgeshire, the trial was a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. Neighbors who had once waved to Robert and Sian now questioned how well they truly knew the people around them. The case was widely covered in the media, with analysts dissecting every detail of Robert's crime. Psychologists debated the motivations behind his actions, while criminologists praised the detectives for their meticulous work. But for those closest to Sian, the focus remained on honoring her memory. Her family set up a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence and raising awareness about the warning signs of emotional and financial abuse. As her sister put it, "If Sian's story can save even one person, then her death won't be in vain." The question that lingered in everyone's mind was one that would never truly be answered. How does someone cross the line from desperation to murder? The story of Robert and Sian Hammond is one that will forever haunt the quiet streets of Cambridgeshire. It is a story of betrayal, greed, and the devastating consequences of a single selfish decision. But it is also a story of resilience, of a family's strength in the face of unimaginable loss, and a community's determination to find justice. For Sian's family and friends, the pain of her loss remains a constant presence. They remember her as a woman who brought light and love into the lives of everyone she met. A woman who deserved so much more than the fate she suffered. For the detectives who worked tirelessly to solve the case, the conviction was a testament to the power of forensic science and the importance of unwavering dedication. This case reminded us that even the most meticulous plans can unravel, Detective Carter said in a reflective interview. The truth is always there, you just have to find it. For the broader community, the Hammond case served as a sobering reminder of the complexities of human behavior. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, relationships, and the hidden struggles that can drive people to unthinkable actions. The legacy of the case, however, extends beyond the crime itself. Sian's foundation has already begun to make an impact, providing resources and support to those in need. As her sister put it, Sian's life was about helping others. That's how we want to remember her. Not for how she died, but for how she lived. In the end, the story of Sian and Robert Hammond leaves us with a question that lingers long after the trial has ended. How do we rebuild trust in the wake of betrayal? And how do we honor those we've lost while moving forward? Thank you for watching CrimeByte. Subscribe, like, and click the notification bell for more stories that illuminate the shadows of human nature. Together, let's seek the truth, one case at a time.